All right, so for today's training, what we're going to be doing and what we're going to focus on is some of the storytelling capabilities or trying to go through a process of how do you build a story or build a data visualization so that you don't just show one visualization, but rather it's a story that you're starting to build. And so this is one visualization that's coming from the IHME. So this is a predictive or a model that looks at what the actual number of COVID-19 deaths were, what the actual number of confirmed cases were, and then I'm adjusting the scale here so that you can better compare the different trends. And this is something I highlighted in a recent video, but there's a lot of discussion and a lot of sort of argument going around this discrepancy where you see confirmed cases increasing, yet you don't see that corresponding spike in deaths. So you'd expect that they would follow the same curve. And so part of the reason, part of what I'm trying to help people understand is that, this confirmed cases is only those that are actually being tested. And that within there, the IHME, and there's tons of other models we could look at, but the IHME actually has a predictive model for what they predict to be the number of actual confirmed cases at that time. And so when you look at it this way, and I will say that this does relate directly to deaths, they use deaths as part of their calculation. So that is an influencer here, which is why it so closely ties. But there's other models that don't necessarily look directly at that. But when you look at it this way, it starts to show a little more better understanding of where the death rate is and where we are today. And so then if we look ahead at what is the future hold or where are we going, this last step is the predictive portion. And this is where they predict sort of the cases peaking in January and deaths peaking towards the end of January as well. And so, I'm focused on this less or so on the COVID-19 data itself for this conversation, but really some of the storytelling components here, right? That we start out with one graph and then we add in another layer and then we compare the two by adjusting the axes of that first one so you can more easily compare. And then from there, adding another layer in that's, way too big to be able to really see. And so then again, sort of scaling that down so you're able to see just the changes as opposed to focusing on the magnitudes. The tests we can sort of maybe skip possibly, but we could also include. And then the last step of actually building out sort of the last portion. So there's actually a lot of complex things sort of going on here, even though it's somewhat simple. And the other reason I want to show this is that it's an example of something that is sort of this blend between 2 dimensions and 3 dimensions, where it does have some depth to it, but the depth isn't as much of the focus. And the depth is really being used here to layer in the story elements and make sure that you can see the defined layers against each other, but not necessarily taking up so much space that it doesn't necessarily add much value. And I think, and I think there's a lot of value just to having a story built and how you tell a story that way. So I'll pause there and try to get your all's impression of this and any questions before we start to dive in.
Is it fair, Michael, that you're trying to tell the story, like ultimately you're trying to say how is actual tracking the model and what's in store for us in the next 3 months? That's what ultimately you want people to walk away with.
Yeah, it's an understanding of like why confirmed cases goes up, but deaths doesn't necessarily jump up as readily. And then yes, the future. What does the future hold? So to those 2 main points, correct. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Any other questions or thoughts?
I'm just curious, how long did this take you roughly?
This one? I think it took me. So I don't really track my hours necessarily, but it probably took me maybe 3 hours or so ish. I mean, a lot of it's actually not spent in flow, but actually doing the data work and finding the data and figuring out what to show and what the story is. And that's actually what I'm going to cover in the next session is with a group that is a little more has gone through more training, and part of that process is actually going to be going to the IHME site, downloading the data from there, and going from there to actually go through the cleansing process. And if I recall correctly, actually, Joe, I think you might have brought this up last time where you actually wanted to focus more on the data cleansing element and that focus. So maybe what we can do here is a blend of those. Let me think here real quick. because this would be a good example. It would be a good example of it. So let's maybe try to tackle that today. So we might extend this a little further and do something a little more advanced. And if we don't capture everything to finish it out, I think that'll be okay. That way we can focus a little bit on the data collection portion as well. So what I'm going to do here, so this is the IHME site. What I'm going to do is point you to the data. And so to do that, I'm going to put this into the chat window. And if everyone can click on that link, it will bring you to the IHME site. And we can basically start with that raw data, and then how do we go from that raw data into the form that we need it to be to actually build out this visualization. And you'll start to appreciate the so we'll go from there. So once you're at this site, so let's select the most recent estimate. So we'll click that main link. It's a pretty large file here, so it's 71 megabytes, and it's a zip file. So let that download for people, and then we'll unzip it. Just a moment here. Okay. So we'll extract the zip file. So then we'll see the different documents that we can start to look through. The one we're going to open is the reference hospitals all locations, which is a very large file, but we're going to be paring it down quite a bit. And let me open this up. Okay. All right. So is everyone still with me? Were you guys able to download the data itself?
Yep.
Great. All right. So I'm going to share my screen the old way so it's a little clearer here. Just a moment. Okay. Okay. So what we're looking at, this is the raw file. And so just to give you guys a sense, so this is 153,000 rows. And this goes all the way to BU. So more than 52 entries or columns here. So there's a lot of data, to say the least. And so how do we pare this down into just what we're looking for? And so for this example, the first thing we can do is just look for the US, since this graph itself is just going to be for the US. But we could highlight a number of countries or start to look at that. That was actually one of the first things I did with this data set originally. And so for that, let's go ahead and do the data filter, and then filter for just the United States. And once we have that filtered, there's multiple ways to do this, but I just I create a new sheet, and then copy, or Control A, Control C, and then Control V. And so that will paste the values in for just the United States. And so we'll see that this is now much more manageable size. So yeah, like 400 rows as opposed to the thousands that we had before. And so what this is looking at is there's a lot of different data points here. And I'm not going to spend the time to go through all of these, but just to give you a sense, they have a mean, which is the average of whatever metric they're capturing. Then they have a lower bound, an upper bound for each of those as well. So each of these metrics actually has 3 metrics you could pull from. And I point all these out because you can make this super complicated, which might be valuable in certain instances. But for the most part, you want to try to keep something sort of simple and introduce one element at a time. And I think that's sort of a critical thing to look at. And so if I look back at the actual data that we were using for this previous visualization, these were the different attributes that came into account. So there's the death mean smooth total population, the death mean per 100,000 rates, estimated infections mean per 100,000 rates, the death data type, which will be really important, the mobility, which we actually didn't use, but we can still pull, the confirmed number of infections, the ICU bed, which actually we also didn't show, but we could look into, total tests, daily tests, and deaths mean smooth per 100,000. So you're seeing a lot of different, like these names are not necessarily the most user friendly, and this ends up being where you spend a lot of time, where it's like, what data do I really want to show? What story do I really want to tell? So if I go back to here, what we can do is let's just insert a few rows. So insert and then Control or F4 to repeat that process. And so I'm going to pause here and let's see where people are. So if you were able to download the data sets, open it in Excel or Google Sheets and start to build from here. So let me pause here and just check in with everybody to see where everyone's at.
I'm right there with you.
Okay, great. And,
Yeah, I'm good too.
awesome. And Tyler? How are you doing?
Michael, I tried to open it up. Unfortunately, I don't have Excel.
Okay,
And I'm not sure how to get it into Google Sheets.
got it. So for that, within Google Sheets, if you go to, so if I go new spreadsheets, so after you've downloaded it, if you go File, Imports, and then you should be able to select that file from where you downloaded it, or drag it over. So in this case, if I drag this CSV over, oops, not like that. Sorry. Oh, there it is. Then you can upload the data set into the Google Sheets. And that way you can filter from there. So let me know if that's working for you.
Thanks.
Yep. Okay. Okay. So back here. So one of the, there's a couple really nice things about this data set compared to others where there's not as much cleaning that is necessary. And in addition, they actually do the calculations per capita for you, which is a huge benefit compared to other data sources. So one thing to note. And so, we can pull all sorts of things, but I think that the main elements of the story that we wanted to focus on, one is the number of confirmed cases. And so let's first find that in here. Okay. So okay, so we have confirmed infections. On mine, it's column AY. It might be just a little different for yours, depending on how many cells you added. And then I hit Control X or cut that row and then paste it in. There's many ways to do this. This is just what I've found to be easiest, is just sort of build what you need. And then let me keep going.
Michael, what was the column title?
The column title was confirmed infections. It's just too large. Tyler, were you able to upload that CSV file? If not, I can get it going for you.
It says it's still uploading right now.
Okay. I think it's going to come back and basically say it's too large. So what I'm going to do here is just within Excel, I'm just going to save this as a CSV or for just the US data, and then you can keep going with this.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Oh, I think it's all good.
Oh, it works for you? Okay. Okay, let me know if not. Anytime I'm just going to upload this real quick.
Sorry, never mind.
Nope, didn't work. All good.
No.
Okay, so this is going to be. Okay, so I'm gonna paste this link into the chat window for you,
Perfect. Thank you.
Tyler, and that way you can just access that sheet and go from there. And then I can work off of this sheet as well. So let me insert a few columns here. Or I won't use this one this way. You can use this one as your starting file.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So another thing to sort of call out here. So you could actually just upload the CSV file and be good to go, and we can start building with it. The reason to sort of limit the columns is one, for your own sanity, so that you don't have so many things in the drop-down list that it gets confusing what to pick from. And then two, load times for the page itself. If you have a lot of data cells that are in these large CSV files, whenever you load up the flow, it's actually loading that full CSV file, even if you're not using all of the cells. It is something we're thinking about to help optimize for future performance issues, so that it only loads the cells that you're actually referencing in playback mode. But that is not in place at this moment. So let's keep going here. So I think the other thing we want to bring in is, so we want to bring in this confirmed, wait, no, not confirmed. Okay, yeah. So we want to bring in the estimated infections mean, as well as this column, which is the estimated infections data type. This will make more sense in a moment. So I can fix those over.
Say those titles again, Mike?
Yep, so it's estimated infections data type. Oh, sorry, let me share my screen again so you can more clearly see. So this is estimated infections mean, and then estimated infections data type. So I'll paste that into the chat window here. Right. And then the last one we really want to bring in is the total number of deaths. So for that, we look at deaths mean, and then deaths data type. So these two columns here. Okay. So there's more we could bring in here. We don't need this V1 column, so I can delete that. The location name we don't necessarily need because we have other dates to, or we only have one country, but I'll leave it for now. But I think those are the main ones that we're going to need here. And so this is, relatively basic, but so I'm going to do one last thing, which is just copy this over to a new sheet so that it's clean. And then from here, I can click File, Save As, select whatever folder I'm going to put it into, and save it as a CSV. I'm going to save this IHME US. And then it's going to give you some prompts and warnings, but you can save through that. So let me know if that worked for everybody. I'll also upload this data set into our drive here so that people can follow along if you want to just use the exact same file I have here. So I'm gonna get the link to share this. I'll put that into the chat window as well, in case you guys want to download the direct CSV. So let me pause there. Any questions on this data formatting? And this one is a little friendlier of a data set compared to many of the other ones. But it has some of the things that I think are important that you might not see necessarily on other types of spreadsheets. So one of those being that what you'll notice here is that the date column is an actual column that's increasing this way. Oftentimes what you'll see is you'll see data where every column has a different date. So it's more of a table where you see date across the top here, and then the different attributes down this list. And so it's actually a transformation that you need to do to the data to get it into this format. And I can go over that in more detail at another point. As a very quick answer, there's some add-ons. So there's a Tableau add-on to Excel that actually makes that really simple to do. So that's the main thing I use, but there's other ways to do this as well. So let me pause here and just see where people are in terms of the data formatting, since I know I'm sort of diving through that, and it's it can be a little tricky. So how are you guys feeling if we start with Michael?
Okay, I kind of fell behind when we were rearranging all the data. So the columns I need are confirmed cases, and then what are the other four?
Yep, so the four are confirmed infections.
Okay.
Here, I'll paste all of them into the chat window as well, so people can see it.
Thank you.
So it's confirmed infections, estimated infections, data type, estimated infections mean, deaths data type, and deaths mean.
Okay.
And
I started to switch it over to Google Sheets because I'm a little bit more comfortable with Google Sheets.
Sure.
But I'm having a little bit more trouble than I thought. Excel was a little bit more straightforward for this.
No, it's okay. I think Google Sheets actually is a really good source to use, actually, for the most part. And if you want to just quickly get up to speed, I think what we went through here was pretty basic, but hopefully gives you an appreciation for when you go from these huge data sets to then okay, how do we pare this down just to what we want to visualize, which is a little bit of effort, and then just picking which columns to actually start to visualize. Yeah. And this takes a little bit of time.
I was trying to make a flow for some picture data for the baseball team, and I'm kind of having trouble with this exact part, just kind of rearranging everything, picking what data to actually choose.
Yep.
Is there any way you could just share, just for time, the file you have already created?
Yep. So I put that link just above in the chat window, so it's right above confirmed infection or the data fields. If you click that, you'll download the right CSV. So we're all on the same page there.
Okay, that's the IHME US, but it doesn't look exactly like yours. It's just it has everything. It's not all cleaned yet.
Yeah, my apologies. Apologies for that. Give me 1 second. It's this one. I copied the wrong one. Here we go. Okay. All right. Apologies for that. So yeah, the one I just pasted in is the correct file then.
Okay. Yeah. There you go. Thank you.
No problem. Cool. So yeah, this is to Joe, your point last time. This was definitely can be some of the trickier aspect here, which is getting the data into the right format and being able to work with it. Any other questions that you have, Joe, that came to mind, or anything you're encountering on the data side that might be beneficial to talk through?
No, I not on the data cleansing side as far as parsing out or paring down spreadsheets. That's pretty simple stuff. But the other part of, I guess it's on the flow side, to better understand the data types that it accepts and the formatting that it accepts. Because you can cleanse the spreadsheet all you want, if it doesn't comply to the fundamentals of flow, then you're going to have troubles in that area. In other words, longitude, is it latitude, longitude, is it formatted a specific way? Because there's multiple ways to do that. So more around that understanding.
Got it. Yep, that's a good question. So for the most parts, what we accept is any number, and it can actually be in scientific notation as well. Some of the things we don't work with yet, but will in the future, are things like percentage signs. So if a percentage sign is in the text itself, it recognizes it as a character as opposed to an actual number. So that's one element. For latitude and longitude, it's just the number itself without the degree symbol and without the north, south, east, or north and west indications. And then for dates, we actually do accept pretty much any date time. time we don't work with yet. You need to extract hours, minutes, and seconds separately, essentially, at this point, unfortunately. So we'll still figure out sort of more on the specific time element there for individual day, but it does recognize date time as a field as well. Yep, I think that pretty much covers that element of it. Some of the other things to note is that if you do have a numeric field, if you have any NAs, so if you have literally an NA or something like that, it won't, that field, that column, for example, for latitude and longitude, if you have an NA in any cell within latitude and longitude, it's not going to recognize latitude and longitude from the dropdown as an option to select from because it sees a character in there. So it assumes that column has a character value. It's not non-numeric. So those are some of the issues that I've definitely run into, and you might as well. Does that resonate with you, Joe? And any questions on that?
No, absolutely. Especially special characters, UTF-8 encoding, things like that really falls into special characters and where you run into issues and the data will not be presented the way you want or pick it up at all. So no, you nailed it pretty much exactly right on it.
Okay, great. Yeah, and then if you guys do run into issues, please do email me, and you can literally just point me to the flow, and it's usually pretty easy to diagnose what's going on with the data set itself, just because we've run into it many times and can help address those issues. One last thing I'll mention is that you'll notice that especially with this data set and many others, they have tons of decimal points. And if you create a label, so one thing I often do, for example, for this mean infection rate, to have a label that has that many decimal places is kind of ridiculous to show someone. And so if you actually want a label that someone can read more legibly, I typically create another field that I call like label or something like that. So if I say like infection label, and then there's a function for rounding, and so you can round the number to the appropriate number of decimal places. In this case, I actually just want it to be whole. The other way to do that is to actually select the column, and then you can change the. Oops. You can click this button to increase or decrease the fidelity of the estimation. But I'll just create this other label field here, and yeah. So we'll go with that. Any other questions on the data here? And if you do have a percentage sign, this is another area where you can basically do a concatenation. So you concatenate the number and then add in a percentage sign. And I can help you with the formula for that, which I did not spell right. Oops. So you get the percentage sign. So that's helpful for labels where you want to show the percent or things like that. Which
Michael, you're not sharing your screen.
Yeah, we can't see.
oh my gosh, sorry. Thanks. Apologies for that. Apologies. Okay. So yeah, all I was going through was this adding a column for label. And so with that column, you can create a function called round, which essentially rounds the number to the nearest decimal, or in this case, just rounding it to the nearest one digit, and go from there. So that is all. So with that, let's go ahead and let's actually start to dive into the flow itself. And let's get going. Okay. So what I'm going to do is click on the home button here, and I'll start the creation. And let's see. So Joe, since we were just done with you, why don't we have you kick things off this time for the actual screen share and to start to build this out, and I'll keep this
Yeah,
up
let's do it.
for reference.
Because some of the other I didn't have to put out early as well, so I'll start off. That's perfect.
Okay, perfect. So if you want to share your screen, we can all follow along with you.
I started out at pretty much where you left off. Can you see the screen?
Yes, I can.
All trying to expand on my screen. Okay, should be good.
Mm-hmm. Great. So, yep, first step will be to upload the data. We got it.
Yeah, remember where I put this stuff? There we go.
Okay, great. Perfect, and you can close that. Awesome. So we're going to create the swarm. Yep, create new. Got it. And then we'll select the data source from what we just uploaded. Perfect. And we're seeing all the random dots come into place. And let's go ahead and select a scatter plot from the chart type. Yep. So then the horizontal, I believe, is going to be dates. And we're going to want to check that box that says axis is timeline so that it recognizes that it's time or date and time. Oh, it looks like we can't count time. Interesting. Okay. I might need to explore that. I might have just
find them.
I might have just discovered something that I did not realize. Okay, cool. And then on the vertical axis for this very first view, I think we're going to look at confirmed, I think we're looking at just deaths. So we'll click on deaths mean. Yep. And then the depth axis, let's go ahead and uncheck that for right now. This will make more sense in a moment here. Great. And so here we're seeing the deaths data. And what you'll notice is that there's sort of this bumpy part and then a very smooth part. And so what's happening there is the beginning portion is the observed number, and then the latter portion is the predicted number. And so the first thing we're going to do for this first view is actually add a filter. And so this is going to be a text-based filter. And so if you scroll down and click on filter, we're going to create a new filter. We got it. And then this is the little tricky part where we need to probably remedy, but instead of clicking on column first, we're going to click where it says is greater than and select contains.
Perfect.
Yeah. And then we're going to select the column that is for deaths data type. And we're going to look at the ones that say are observed. So if you type observed there, you'll see it start to filter out. Yep. Cool. And so what you'll notice there is that when you filtered, it actually it widened out. And I don't know if we covered this before, but there's another option here. So if you select where it says axis options and open up that section and scroll down a little bit, and this might be under advanced. Yeah, thank you. And scroll up just a little bit there. Yeah. So there's a little checkbox there where it says maintain axes when filtered. And so if we uncheck that, then it's actually going to go back to where it was. I think the verbiage actually might be switched, so we might want
to... The verbiage is switched, and I fixed that last night. There'll be a new version tonight that'll say collapse when checked as opposed to maintain when checked.
I also think we might want to just put it into the filter section, just as a brainstorm.
I took it out of the advanced set area.
Okay, cool. So now what you're seeing is that the axes maintained their perspective, and we can see just the observed deaths. So there's actually quite a lot of complicated things there that are going on. So let me check in with everybody for Michael, Tyler, and Ed, if you guys were able to follow along with that, and we can diagnose as you guys have experienced it.
I think I'm on board. I'm doing well.
Nice. Okay. Tyler, how you doing?
Yep, all good. Thanks.
Awesome. And Ed, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm never going to be able to catch up, but I'm plugging along. It's good.
Sure. Okay. Great. All right. So some of the other things you'll notice here. So the x-axis with the dates is a little overlapping and messy. So there's a couple ways we can address that. One is that we could space out the axes points so that they're just less overlap. Or another way to do it is underneath, if you go back towards the top, underneath the formats for date, one thing, since we know what year it's happening, we could just change this to month short. And I found that to be pretty effective to be able to communicate just what month we're talking about, since you know what year it is. So anyways, I think that's the easiest solution there, but there's different ways to address that. So any questions on that? Okay, cool. So we'll keep dragging through. So let's go ahead and change the color here to, let's change it to red, but we can, adjust this as necessary.
Right here?
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Great. All right, and then let's go ahead and yep. All right, so we've built the first portion. Oh, and then one last thing. So let's click on connections, and we're going to create a new connection. Yep, and we're going to tie it to swarm number 1. And this is going to be tied to the category. I believe it's the deaths mean would be the column. Yeah. Oh, sorry. It's not deaths mean. My apologies. Just if you select that again and then do location ID or location name, which is just the United States, basically, that will work. And so there we can see the line coming into play here. And so what you'll notice is that it's actually showing the line for the predicted number as well. And that's just an artifact of the filter not being updated yet. But when you refresh the page or when we add a step, that will go away. So in case you're concerned with what's going on there. Great. So let's go ahead and add a step, and then we'll pass the.
Should we set the camera before we move out of the step?
Yeah, that's a great idea. So you can set the camera wherever you see appropriate. Perfect. And then let's add a step here. Great. And let's go ahead and have Michael. Do you want to present your screen next?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So there's a few ways to do this. So what we could do is we could actually try to put all of these visualizations into one swarm, and we'd actually have to go back to the data source and take all of those columns and collapse it down into one spreadsheet or one cell. But the reason we're going to do this is that we have a little more control over the axes. So what we're going to do is create a new swarm. And so if you click on Create New, and actually one way to do it, instead of clicking Create New, if you can click Delete on this one. Yep. And if you click back on Swarm 1, or click Swarm 1 and then click on Duplicate.
Duplicate.
And so what Duplicate does is it exactly what you might imagine. It duplicates the swarm and it's visible. So you see swarm 2 here. And then what we can do is that now it has all the right attributes, it's doing the filter. And so what we can do is change the vertical axis here. So instead of looking at deaths mean, let's go ahead and look at, I think we want to look at confirmed infections. Perfect. So we'll see that come into play. And so you see how this sort of, it makes it a little easier to iterate through. And the one thing I recognize that's, the thing we're going to have to fight with here is that these are different axes. So you'll notice here that it's going from, 0 to 155,000, right? Whereas the other scale was going from like 1 to, I think, 2,600. So they're very different scales. And so what I did in my first visualization is I went back to swarm 1. And so if you click back on swarm 1.
Oh, did that do it?
That will not do it. I think it just changes the name of it, actually. So if you...
Oh,
That's fine, yeah. It won't. It's that drop down a little further up where there's the little search icon, that gray drop down bar. Yep,
okay.
that's how you're going to select it. So, yeah, you see the names are a little
This
confusing.
one.
So that's the one we just built. And it also looks like we're back on step 1. So what we'll want to do is click on step 2. Yep. And then, so you're on swarm 1 now. And so on this swarm, let's go ahead and create a new perspective. And we can just call this 2. So we're on the second step, perhaps. Yep. And then on this, let's set the height max to what the other max was, which is 1,000 or 150,000. Great. And so basically, it makes it go super far down, right? In terms of what the number looks like. And that's something we'll adjust later, but that way we at least have the same axes. And so let's go back to the other swarm. So if we go to swarm 2. Yep. And then let's go ahead and set the height max there to 150,000. I wasn't exact with the other one. We could have made the other one exact, but this way we'll at least have the same axes lines. And then you'll also notice that there's the axes are overlapping in terms of the text and all of that. And so to get rid of it, essentially, if you scroll down on that page, you'll see there's underneath up just a little bit. You'll see underneath axes options, show width axis, show height axis, show depth axis. And if you go ahead and uncheck those, it will actually turn off the axes lines. And so this is one option for how you can start to clean this up to make it look or appear to be basically in the same visual space. The only other thing that I started to do on the other visualization that you saw is instead of having these exactly overlaid on top of each other, to have it pushed back or pushed forward just a hair. And to do that, if you click on position,
Position, is that under axis options?
it's not. It's actually its own category. So if you collapse, there you go, positioning. And then on close far, if you just type in 0.01 or 0.01, it's going to move it up just a hair. So if you turn it on the side, you'll see that it separates it out just a little bit. So it's not much, but what that will help with is that when we add these scatter drop lines, it won't interfere. And so the other thing to do then is to change the color so we can more clearly see this. And I think we had it yellow for the one I put together. Perfect. That works. And then what we'll do is if you go back to connections, we're going to want to do those same connections that we had before. And yep, that's one way to do it. Perfect. So new connections. And then the category is the location name. Perfect. And you'll see that little extraneous line that will go away once we refresh or go to the next step. Cool. All right, so let's pass the baton here over to Tyler, and we're going to add in the last layer, which is looking at the number of estimated infections. Great. So for this one, let's go ahead and if you can go to swarm. Perfect. And let's go ahead and actually, let's go to swarm 2 for me. Perfect. And let's duplicate this swarm. And the reason I'm duplicating this swarm rather than swarm 1 is because this one only has one perspective. So that way we're not duplicating an additional perspective that we're not going to be using. And so on this swarm, we're now going to change the vertical axis from confirmed infections to that estimated infections. And it is not an estimated infections data type, but rather the estimated infections mean. There you go.
Gotcha.
Perfect. No, good. Awesome. Great. And so with that, you'll notice that the heights change to whatever the min and max are for that system. But what we want to do is change the minimum to 0, since that was what the 0 was for the last one. And then in addition, set the max to 150,000. And so what you'll see is this line just goes out of sight, basically, because it's so high up there. But this way, everything is to scale, right? And we can adjust these back down in the next couple steps. And so we've essentially, started to rebuild this. And one last thing to do will be also to pull this one forward just a little bit as well. And I realize now we actually don't want to pull it forward. We actually want to push it back. The reason being because it's taller than the other ones, it will block it if we have it in front. So let's go ahead and do minus 0.1 or minus, and instead of doing 0.1, do minus 0. Let's do 0.2.
Okay.
Sorry, 0.02.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, you're good. And I'm missing a decimal place. Yeah, 0.02. Perfect. Okay. And yeah, that should work. And let's go, if you go back to Swarm 2, let's just quickly fix Swarm 2 while we're here. And if you go down to positioning and change that to minus 0.01. Perfect. And then we'll, okay. I think that should work. Jason, I noticed there's not a apply position to all steps there. Is that?
I'm sorry, say again?
Positioning on swarm scatter plots, there's no apply position to all steps. Is position tied to perspective, or?
It's applied per perspective, and you're right, there isn't any way to copy it automatically to other perspectives.
Okay, that's fine.
Do it by hand. So good point though.
Okay.
I'll take a note.
Okay, cool. And so let's go ahead and change this color as well. I think this one was blue, if I'm not mistaken. I like it. Look at that. Nice. Manual way. Cool. All right. Oh, that looks like. Oh, sorry. We were on Swarm 2 there, so that's why the color changed for Swarm 2.
My bad.
Yeah, all good. And then so we can change. Awesome. Okay. Cool. So the one other thing that I had in the other visualization was the scattered drop lines. One thing we are adding here pretty soon is area charts, so that you don't have to. The drop lines won't be for every point, but rather you'll see this area, which will be really nice. And I'll just quickly show you that once, but we don't need to spend too much time going through that. But if you click on connections, yep, and let's go ahead and we'll add the first connection, which is going to be category and then column location name. And then if you can go ahead and duplicate this connection.
Okay.
And instead of doing connection type category, change it to scatter drop lines. And then you'll see these lines come down. And so that's how you start to build out this visual. And there are some extraneous lines there. That's just the artifact from saving and refreshing and all of that. Cool. And I realized we forgot to add a step for this, so apologies for that. We can address that here in a moment. And I do want to be cognizant of time since we're at 2:54. So the other things that we're going to get to after this, and what I want to show you is, so I'm going to share my screen real quick. So we basically got to this. You'll notice that there's labels here as well, but you guys are, I think, well versed in terms of being able to add text. One thing we found useful is to match the color of the text to whatever field you have as sort of a way to add labels. And the thing I wanted to show then after this is how do we do this last portion, which is the estimation. So to do that, what we're going to do is get these axes back in line so you can actually just look at the trends. And then we're going to turn off that filter so that it extends over the whole sphere here, or the whole rest of the plot. I realized we had Joe had to jump off here, but yeah, Michael, why don't we have you present again? We'll try to close out this last portion.
Okay, so I kind of got behind and then just started to follow along. So
Okay.
I don't know. I think if Tyler could keep going, that'd be
Sure.
more ideal.
Yeah, I think
Sure, I can keep going.
Yeah, we're pretty much almost done anyway, so it's all good. Okay. Cool. So for this last step, Tyler, let's go ahead and add a new step. And I realized that if you go back to step 2 for me, and then on step 2, let's go ahead and select swarm 2.
Okay.
And then select swarm 3, apologies. And let's uncheck visible on step. And so when you uncheck, you'll notice the lines are still there. It's because the connections are still visible. And so if you click on connections, yep, and then go to, yep, you got it. And then uncheck those. And then there's one more for the scatter drop lines as well, which it's actually connection 4.
Oh, gotcha.
Mm-hmm. And then if you uncheck that way you'll get back. Cool. All right. Nice. Great. So now let's go ahead and if you go back to step 3, let's go ahead and add another step here.
Add another step?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And on this last step, let's go ahead and we're going to go to each of the swarms and create a new perspective. So let's go ahead and start with swarm 1. Yeah, and create a new perspective. Just label this like 4. Yeah, it works. And for the minimum maximum, this is where we're going to adjust it so we can actually sort of see it more clearly. And so let's just take off a 0 from it and see what that does. Yeah, I think that works to basically see the trend. And then let's go ahead and go to swarm 3. Create a new perspective there. Yeah. And for this, let's adjust the height range max up. So let's make that like a 30 or 300,000 instead of 150,000.
Oops. Sorry.
Great. Okay. So I think that's a little more clear. You know, we could fine tune it. And then let's add one last step here. Right. And then on this last step, let's go ahead and create a new perspective for this third graph, or sorry, this third swarm. Yep. And for this, let's go ahead and go down to filter and delete that filter that we had in place. And that way it will animate out the rest of it. There we go. Perfect. And then we'll do the same thing for swarm number 1, where we create a new perspective for that swarm. So new perspective. And we'll delete the filter. Perfect. Let's do that. Populate through. Nice. Cool. So we basically recreated a lot of the core elements here. You know, there's some other details within the flow itself. But one last thing I want to just quickly show you guys, and I'll show my screen real quick, is what you'll notice here is that at the beginning, you'll see that everything sort of animates into place. You see how it sort of comes out of nowhere, or comes from this lower left-hand corner and starts to animate up. So the way you do that is that every step, it's basically looking at what was the perspective before and then animate and add motion between those two. And so to actually do this, and I'll just quickly show this. or actually, Tyler, if you could share your screen one last time, I'll just quickly show you here in just a minute, and then we can wrap it up.
Sure thing.
Okay,
Um,
thanks. Are you sharing, or am I missing it?
Oh, sorry. Can you not see it?
Oh, I see it now. Sorry. Cool. Great. So if you go to step 1 for me, and if you then click on swarm 2, so swarm 2 is not visible, right? But what we can still do is can you add a perspective for this? Yep. And underneath type, select random. And then set the width, height, and depth to 0. Not for positioning, but rather for the, right
here,
there.
yeah,
Exactly. And then if you actually click on visible on this step, if you check that, it will, all right, might be in a weird spot. So actually, if you go down to where it was positioning, it was saying position, a little further down on your page, you just hit the 0, zero that out. Okay, so you can see the dot now. And so we'll just leave it there for now. And then if you go ahead and click the next button to go to the next step, what you'll notice is that it animated in a weird way, but the animation is there. Did it sort of did it backwards almost. But I think in playback mode that should look correct. I can't tell exactly what's going on. And so you can actually have that first step be not visible. So instead of having that dot be seen in that very first step, if you have it unchecked, it will still animate through to that second step.
Okay. I think we got it working now.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, cool. So that's just a small little detail, but I think does add some benefit to understand how you start to animate between these steps and start to make this more dynamic storytelling. So with that, I know we're over time by just a minute or two, but appreciate you guys taking some more time here to learn, and hopefully this was beneficial to understand some of the nuance here. And there's a lot more we can keep building on this one, but appreciate you guys jumping on again.
Thank you as always.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, thanks guys.
And thanks, Michael. This session was super
That's
helpful
great.
for me.
Awesome. Very good. All right. Until next week. Thanks, guys. And feel free to email me if any other questions come up or you guys want help finishing this one out.
Thanks, Michael.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Talk soon.